You've done everything right. You hit the goal, you got the thing, and then you waited for the feeling to arrive and it didn't. Or it did for about 11 days and then life just went back to gray. So you told yourself you hadn't done enough yet, that the next level would be the one that actually sticks, that happiness was just slightly further down the road you were already on. Here's what nobody told you. That instinct isn't drive, it's a design flaw, and every time you followed it, you moved further away from the thing you were actually chasing. What we're talking about today isn't motivation. It isn't gratitude journals. It's the specific, science-backed reason why genuinely happy people think and behave differently, and why most of us are solving the wrong problem entirely. Happiness, when you strip away the illusion, is more than a feeling. I know, that sounds like something a therapist says right before she gaslights you into going back to your ex. But stay with me. When most people say they want to be happier, what they mean is they want to feel better more often. The research disagrees. Positive psychology doesn't define a well-lived life as a sustained emotional high. It defines it as a matrix, a combination of purpose, autonomy, connection, flexibility, and yes, occasional sadness, because apparently sadness has a seat at the table. Happiness isn't a destination, it's a practice, and that changes everything about how you pursue it. For a long time, I was absolutely convinced that I was one achievement away from feeling okay. I wasn't chasing anything reckless, I was doing the things you're supposed to do. Working hard, improving, staying focused. On paper, things were moving in the right direction. But on the inside, there was this low level of dissatisfaction that never quite went away. I'd reach something I'd wanted for months and feel a kind of flatness within days. Not depression, just nothing. Like arriving at a party and realizing it's already wrapping up. The embarrassing part? I thought that meant I needed to want more, that I just hadn't found the right goal yet. So I'd reset, pick a new target, and run at it again. I was productive, technically. I was also running a hamster wheel with a very sophisticated narrative about it. What it quietly took from me was time. I wasn't miserable, but the hours I spent in future-focused anxiety, the relationships I kept at arm's length because I was always half distracted, the moments I was physically present for but emotionally elsewhere, those added up, and one day I noticed that I couldn't actually remember the last time I'd felt genuinely good for no particular reason. That was the crack. Not a breakdown, just a quiet question. What if I've been looking in the wrong direction this whole time? What I didn't know then, and what most people don't know, is that the brain is structurally working against sustained happiness, and it's not your fault. There's a concept called hedonic adaptation. The short version, your brain is designed to normalize. You get the thing you wanted, your brain recalibrates, and within months you're back to roughly the same baseline level of satisfaction as before. It's not weakness, it's neurology. The brain's reward system resets after every gain, which means lasting satisfaction after any achievement is, without deliberate intervention, neurologically impossible. Here's where it gets stranger. The part of your brain responsible for wanting something, the dopamine-driven pursuit system, is a completely separate circuit from the part responsible for enjoying it. They don't talk to each other. High drive and high achievement can coexist with almost no capacity to actually feel good about what you've built. This is why so many people who've achieved a lot feel surprisingly empty. The dopamine fueled the chase, it just didn't come with a guarantee on arrival. Neuroscientist Kent Berridge, whose work at the University of Michigan mapped these two systems, put it simply: wanting and liking are not the same thing, and most people spend their lives optimizing for the wrong one. The good news, and there genuinely is good news here, is that researchers estimate roughly 40% of your happiness is within your direct control, not through changing your circumstances, but through changing your habits, your attention, and your behavior. The brain adapts. The question is whether you're directing that adaptation or just letting it happen to you.
So the obvious answer, right, is to just want less. Lower your expectations. Be chill. Stop caring so much. No, that's not it. Being numb isn't the same as being happy. Don't do that. The actual answer is simpler than most people expect. Happy people have specific daily behaviors that manage the brain's defaults. That's it. No personality overhaul, no retreat, just a set of habits that do the thing your brain won't do automatically. In practice, it looks like this. It's protecting one conversation that actually matters, instead of half-having 10. It's choosing to build something with your hands instead of watching someone else build theirs. It's pausing once a day to notice what's already there before your brain files it under normal and therefore invisible. None of this is glamorous. None of it makes a great caption. But here's what it changes: the texture of your ordinary days. And ordinary days are most of your life. That's worth paying attention to. Here are 3 things you can do to become truly happy. Number 1, invest in depth, not breadth. Most people manage their relationships the way they manage their inbox, reactively or at surface level, always slightly behind. They have a lot of people they sort of know, and not many they really know, and they wonder why connection feels thin. Harvard's 85-year study on adult development, one of the longest-running studies in psychology history, found that the quality of your relationships was a stronger predictor of health, happiness, and longevity than genetics, wealth, or IQ. Not the number, the quality. The people who thrived at 80 weren't the most successful, they were the most connected. The shift isn't about being more social, it's about being more deliberate. Identify the 1 to 3 people who already matter most to you, and protect that time the way you'd protect a work commitment. Text one of them today, with no reason, just to check in properly. Number 2, replace consumption with engagement. Passive leisure, scrolling, streaming, consuming, feels like rest, and sometimes it is. But research by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi found that people report their highest levels of well-being not during passive relaxation, but during states of flow, deep engagement with something challenging enough to require full attention. The brain doesn't really rest in passive consumption, it drifts, and drifting tends to land on whatever's unresolved, anxious, or unfinished. Active engagement crowds that out. The practical version of this isn't complicated. Pick something this week that requires you to actually show up, something with a skill curve, something that can go wrong, something that demands your whole attention. Cook a new dish properly, play something badly but seriously. Build the thing you've been putting off. Start there. Number 3, train your attention toward what's already present. The brain has a negativity bias. This is not a character flaw, it's evolutionary. Threat detection kept your ancestors alive, but that same system operates in your daily life, scanning for what's wrong, missing, or at risk, even when nothing serious is happening. A 2003 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology by Emmons and McCullough found that people who regularly reflected on what they were grateful for reported significantly higher well-being than those who didn't, not because their lives were better, but because their attention was trained differently. You don't have to keep a journal unless you want to, but once a day, before your brain files the good stuff under normal and therefore invisible, name 3 things that are genuinely present in your life right now, not aspirationally, actually present. The brain adapts to whatever you point it at. Point it at something worth seeing. Here's the thing about happiness that nobody tells you at the start. It's not louder than ordinary life. It doesn't arrive with a soundtrack. The happiest people you'll ever meet aren't permanently lit up. They get tired and frustrated and disappointed, exactly like everyone else. What's different is quieter than that. It's the way they move through a Tuesday, the way they show up for someone without needing a reason, the way they're actually in the room. That's what's available to you. Not a different life, just a different way of living the one you already have. That's enough to start with.